Enough austerity, it's time for reform. The endless cutbacks pushed by the Eurozone's weaklings, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal and Spain, threaten to crush their economies. So says Reuters Breaking News editor Hugo Dixon. He joins me now. Good to see you again, Hugo. Has austerity gone too far, or is it the wrong thing altogether?
No, I don't think it's the wrong thing altogether. I think it was important to, shrink these fiscal deficits. Some of the expenditure got out of hand, certainly in the boom times. Then you also had an extra fiscal boost that some countries gave their economies after Lehman Brothers went bust. So you did need to shrink things back closer to fit. The problem is that as you shrink these deficits, that shrinks the economies, which means that actually you're sort of running up a down escalator, and therefore then what happens is that then you have a second round of austerity to try to get you back to where you want to be, and then that still doesn't do the job, and you do then a third round and a fourth round.
Are you saying, though, let's leave austerity aside now, let's change the policy mix, let's focus on the structural reform, because this is now going to get us to where we want to get to?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm talking about a big change of emphasis. I mean, there was always part of these programs, if you start with Greece, they all had a mixture of austerity, which was shrinking the fiscal deficit, and structural reform, things like privatization, pension reform, liberalization in the Greek case, cracking down on tax evasion. I mean, all of those sorts of things are structural, long-term programs. Yeah. What I'm saying is two things. First of all, it's very important to distinguish these two types of programs. That's really, really important.
And you say policymakers and pundits are not doing enough of that.
They're not,
and that's been part of the problem.
And they tend to be smooshed together in the discussion as if they're all part of the same austerity thing. And I think that's really bad, because they actually, although they are both unpopular with the people, particularly with vested interests, they have very different growth dynamics. The austerity measures squish the economy's growth, whereas the structural reforms, they actually boost the economy's growth, albeit in the long term. I mean, they don't come through immediately. And what we need to do is we have a crying need now to move away from one after another austerity programs. But you can't do one. You can't just say no austerity, no reform, because then you're not going to get anywhere.
What prompted you to write this piece now and not, say, 2 months ago? I mean, why is now the time to realise that let's do a bit of both, or at least let's put that on the back burner and push for structural reform?
I think the two things that have changed are that you now have new governments in the two big ones, Italy and Spain. And they are doing an austerity program. You had to have an austerity program in Italy, and you got it, Salva Italia, or whatever it was called, in Italy in December. And you will have to have an austerity program in Spain under Rajoy. But what I'm saying is, let's not push Italy and Spain down the same route that Greece has been going down. Let's also make sure, because what Greece, the big mistake of Greece was as well, is that they didn't do very much on that structural reform. They promised, but they delivered very little. If I could also the other thing is that I think that this may be a little bit in tune with the way that the thinking is shifting. I mean, we've got Sarkozy and Merkel today. One of the things on the agenda will be, how do we get growth? Now, of course, the Germans are still coming from this austerity mindset. But if you can tell the Germans, hang on, we're going to do something that's really important that's going to fix these economies. So it's not as though we're just sort of going off to the beach.
And what you've just said brings me on to my final question, and that is, how far do we go with the structural reform? You talk about retirement ages, you talk about labour reform, important labour reform. We've seen quite a lot of this in patches. Where does it end? How far does that need to be pushed now?
I would say we're probably about 10% of the way through what's needed on that front. So quite a lot further.
And it's going to take a long time.
Well, it will take some. It will take time, but you can get the measures announced and passed by your governments, by your parliaments, quickly. You don't have to wait to actually get them passed.
Yep.
Then the actual implementation, you're going to need quite a lot of expertise, and of course you're going to run it roughshod over vested interests, and so
Yep.
you've got to have strong political will to do it. But that is where we ought to be focusing this year.
Fantastic. Good to have you back, Hugo. Many thanks. Hugo Dixon. You can see the European edition of Breaking Views each weekday, by the way, here at 10:30 GMT on Insider. Hugo's op-ed column, This Piece, will be every Monday at around about this time. I'm Axel Threlfall. This is Reuters.